No, just on my stuff. Did you want to go to Dubai?
Can't you put it
We
on?
should reboot Dubai though at some point.
We're rolling.
Are we rolling, Bob?
Bob, are you there?
Hey, we just wanted to get together once again with our dad. Paul and I love talking to Dad, Dave McNeil, and Daddio from Daddio Cast, daddiocast.com. And we potentially are going to talk about mission or purpose.
That's our mission.
Okay.
Our purpose.
That's our purpose, to talk about purpose.
And well, the thing that came to my mind was, as I am now at the age where I remember you first the most, and I wonder about when you were going through, like we were in La Chute, Quebec in Canada, did you have a real sense of your purpose, your mission?
I have to say, not really. Though, I mean, of course, I remember I've been thinking back on it. I think that it would have been good to have that explicit, and that's what I was about to tell you. I think we all have some purpose. We just don't make it explicit. I think when I was in Latuke, I was working for the Indians. My purpose was obviously to make money, to take care of my family. That was important. To realize what I had as in my training and my work with Indians, to work with these people, to help them, to help them and to do what they wanted me to do. But I have to say, I just wrote a letter to a woman, a friend of mine, an Indian that I worked with for years, and not there. But I told her, I said, I never quite was able to capture what the program was, and that was a shortcoming for me. 20 years I worked in bilingual education, and I had some ideas, and I would capture certain ideas and go off on them, like making sure that these educators knew how to write their language, and that would use it and write some material and publish material in their language. But that was a subordinate mission. I think the larger mission they thought was different from mine. Their thought was preserve their culture. See, I was thinking use their culture to educate the kids, to be, because they were in a larger culture there in Canada, in the Canadian culture, whatever. But I thought, I think now, looking back, I have to say, I think now it would have been good if I'd had a counselor or mentor say, okay, Dave, what's your mission here? What's the program? And to hone. And there were people that were assigned to do that. And I was assigned to do it with other people. And I don't think we're really good at it. And I think the government hands out a lot of money, the American government and the Canadian government, a lot of money with kind of vague programs. Yeah. And I'm talking about just there. But the family, the same way, the family needs to have a mission too. But I have to say, the answer to your question was, yes, I had mission, but they were kind of vague. And I never really expressed it to my wife or to the. Every now and then we'd write a program about who we were and what we were doing, but where we were going.
It was descriptive rather than prescriptive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it didn't point enough out there to the future, our purpose.
Sounds like there's a lot. There's a lot involved. Just as you're talking, I think it dawns on me that mission is really hard to do by ourselves. That we can come up with a mission in our head, but without other people.
Got to make it public.
That's right.
What do you think, Paul? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think you got to. There's something performative about stating a mission. That is, the stating of it is part of having a mission, is the actual stating of it. And I don't know.
I think families, could have a mission.
Yeah. And organizations. Yeah. What were you thinking about?
Well, actually, I was way off in a very particular question. We were talking about how cold it is at Cox's restaurant. This little family diner where your dad and I had breakfast this morning.
Because there is that. Go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering, what is the point of a restaurant? What is the mission of restaurants? What is the point of having them?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think? You got one. What do you think?
Well, that's the thing. I don't know. I think it's got to be something more than feeding people.
Why?
Because I think it's more. Well, I think you could feed people at their homes.
People stay longer. They eat instead of just hang around.
I think there's something social.
Yeah, I think gathering places. Yeah.
There's something social, and there's something. What we're trying to go after, what I'm trying to incrementally push, is a bit of an elevation. So you eat a little bit better than you'd eat at home. And you maybe the server, is dressed a little nicer, and the atmosphere elevates. You're like a coffee shop, right? Why do you go there to write or something? Well, one of the ideas is it kind of you feel smarter. Oh, I'm at this fancy coffee shop, and you order something with a fancy name, and it just kind of draws. The idea would be that it draws you upward, and I guess any mission, certainly within the Christian context, is the question is how and who are we drawing upward? Who are we moving ahead? What are we moving ahead?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's true. And I was when I'm working with the Indians, always thinking they were already thinking about leaving the past behind. That's why I was there. They wanted to hire somebody to help them move take over their education, do it their way, put their culture in the education. They were getting ahead, moving ahead. And what I was doing, working with people, getting people, training them, getting them jobs to do that were worthy and putting value in their community and that kind of thing.
But not entirely new, right? Because the whole point is that you're preserving a lot of the past, namely
the
language.
New in their school,
Right, the system is new,
yeah.
But the content is old.
Yeah, some of the content, yeah, for sure.
Or something.
Yeah, and of course, they have to look at it objectively, which, as we would think about it, when we live, we don't look at ourselves objectively. We're just living along. We don't think, well, I live this way. As children, we just live this way. As we grow up, we look at ourselves objectively, just like with Indians. That's what I did, was to help them look at themselves objectively, first with their language. Let's listen to it. Let's write it. Let's talk about it. Let's have old grandpa come in and talk about the ways we do things, or how we trap, or how they used to do things. Objectify it.
As a catch-22 in that, or whatever, in that you lose something obviously by objectifying it, right? It suddenly becomes a little bit more alien, a little bit more clinical, a little less natural. But oftentimes if you don't do that, then you lose the whole thing. If you can only save it by looking at it.
Yeah, because the only alternative would be to close down the school and go back to living the way they were, which is then you're not objectifying. You just live the way they were. You're not taking that and using that in the school. So you're actually admitting there's a certain death to the old way, a certain death,
right,
or a diminution of the old way. You take some of that and put it in the school.
Just to clarify, we're talking about Dad's career of language preservation, curriculum development among native tribes.
The Atikamekw Indians in particular.
Right? In particular, and the Pueblo Indians before that.
Well, that goes back to what we started with, saying that the performative element of stating our mission, objectifying our mission, I think that is a fear sometimes. As in our family, we tend to be like, we want it to be more poetic. I'll say from my perspective.
Me too.
I want it to be more poetic, more magical, more mystical. And so when you objectify it, when I objectify it, it does sort of take the magic out of it.
It's like, I know, exactly.
That's it. That's my mission. Right there. My whole life boiled down to a few sentences.
It's like when we were,
Punctuation error.
all my military training was goal orientation.
Mm,
If you don't know what are you doing?
mm.
You got to know your goal, and then you plan how to achieve the goal, the objective.
Yeah.
And I was good at writing the orders. They would have me help them write op orders. Well, you had to know, what are we trying to do? Then you can write who's going to do it, where we're going to go, how we're going to do it, who's going to have the radios and so on. But you got to know where you're going. Well, that sounds good for a military, but I'm like you. For a family, I thought, I'll just be like Jesus. I'll just walk along. I'll walk along and respond to someone that has a need.
I mean, that's fair. I think that's a valid. So Judah and I are part of a little group we kind of going after the 7 Habits Covey thing. We've set up, we're supposed to be working on a mission statement and that sort of thing. I think it's at least a fair complaint to say Christians don't have mission statements. Take no thought for tomorrow. Be careful for nothing.
Well, that is, don't provide for don't make no provisions for the flesh. I take that, don't worry about what you're going to eat or drink. That's what he said. What clothes you put on. But Jesus himself said, I'm going up to Jerusalem to die.
He also
said his fate. He said his fate.
He also said, I'm not going to Jerusalem once. And then he went.
But in any case, he had purpose. Jesus had purpose. He didn't stumble into the crucifixion. He went purposefully to the cross. And I think of the hero of mine, Jim Elliot, and those guys. They dedicated that they were going to take the gospel to those Alca Indians way out in the middle of the Ecuadorian jungle, and they did, and they lost their lives. But they were intentional. Yeah. I think that sometimes we just have to be intentional, even if it's during the day. You just say, "Well, I got to get that car fixed today. I got to take it down there. It's going to be. I got to talk to the guy, and I may have to go get the parts." You have to set up a goal. Otherwise, if you stumble along, you're going to be behind everybody else and everything.
Yeah, I guess, and I'm obviously doing the thing. I'm coming up with the mission statement and stuff, and I make plans, obviously.
Right.
Well, I don't know how obvious. Certainly not the people that are working with me. It's very obvious, but I'm constantly reminded in reading the scriptures, the New Testament, and the Gospel in particular, how impractical Christ's teaching is. I got in an argument recently with a friend who was taking umbrage at the term Judeo-Christian values. And he says, well, why do we say Judeo-Christian? They're just Christian values. To the extent they're Judeo, they only came by way of Christianity. It's not like there was this massive Jewish contingent in the founding of the American thing that also it's just Christian values. And I pointed out my case was, well, to a large extent, Christian values and Jewish values overlap. And to the extent that they don't, the main values that Christ super added to the Judeo system are not American values. Renunciation, non-resistance, familial antipathy, self-sacrifice, and I added
submission to government.
Where did Jesus?
Huh?
Where did Jesus teach that?
Submission to Caesar what is Caesar's?
Yeah, what's Caesar's? What belongs to Caesar that's not God?
Render to Caesar.
Right. But what is Caesar's that's not God?
Well, he taught it by being himself submissive to the government. So I would say that.
Through example.
No, you talking about Jesus.
Well, and he said slaves. Well, did Christ personally say slaves?
Obey your masters.
No, that's Paul.
No.
But we don't want to listen to him or anything.
But to get back to the idea of mission, it does seem like there is a distinction between like a personal selfish mission, right? Like there is something that we could form that, a solipsistic idea of what we want versus a mission that has to do with what we're called to do, right? So like if our mission starts with the principles that we ascribe to, instead of our values, right? Like if it starts with principles,
Yeah.
or like a calling from God, something that is
Beyond
transcendent,
us,
yeah,
transcend us.
that transcends us. That is much more important and powerful than something that starts with us, starts with our own personal values or desires.
Well, don't we normally assume? I'm just thinking about growing up as a kid. We assume the community has a general. We all are doing the same thing. We all are working to make money, to put value into, to get value out. The economy depends on our assuming that we're all in it for this, for the sake of the good of each person.
Yeah.
In general. And so we don't sit around and say, okay, what are we going to do? Sometimes we do if we're going to have a war, or if we go into a deep recession. Somebody thinks, the government thinks, that we have to we have to tax everybody heavily and do this. I mean, I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying that happens.
Yeah.
We don't objectify what we're doing too much. We just say we understand what we're all doing. We all go to work. We get up. We do our part. And the mission statement, so when it comes like with Paul's business and our business, or whatever we do, we individually, or when things break down, then we say, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And like that, they're beginning to do in America today. See, the sort of things seem to be breaking down. I see it, but
Well, it reminds me, though. I mean, what you're talking about reminds me of Chanda. My wife brought up the other day. She said, "Why is it?" Because we were talking about there's some areas that, particularly as you go more rural south here, that are just getting torn apart by meth and drugs, and it's all over America. And she said, "Why is it that these places that are that they don't have a lot of industry in America are falling apart like this, but you see in like Africa and in some of these poorer continents, countries, they are thriving.
Thriving?
Businesses?
No, families and people.
Like
I don't know. I haven't
where?
been to the hinterlands of Africa.
Well, like you don't like if you visit
someplace.
South America,
Portugal.
poor areas are destroyed by the most perfidious drug use, like sniffing glue.
right, but
Well,
so that's an influence of the Western culture. But like the further you get from Western culture,
Oh, you're talking about. So there are traditional culture.
pre-industrialized.
Traditional culture.
yeah. So the
Well, that's that.
the less industry in or Western influence.
Yeah, that's that Walden idea that it's man who's the guy Rousseau. The man is the one that's introduced sin, and in the state of nature is the closer we are, the natural. But like the Pueblo Indians have, they have that traditional society. But even with them, they always have family, very heavy family discord. Don't have anything to do with that family. So every society has
discord
problems, but you're talking about problems that cause the dissolution or the destruction of the society.
Oh, the tighter network. Because the pre-industrialized Africans, making war on each other with reckless abandon.
I'm trying to think of ways to peaceful.
But they weren't doing, weren't sort of the ennui and the drugs and the sort of all that seems to be a modern problem.
Well, I thought that some of it does have to do with what we're talking about. Is like the lack of a general communal purpose, communal mission.
Yeah.
Well, and some of that's a little bit of a pick your poison, because for some early tribal peoples, the mission was like being in opposition to the other tribe.
Yeah, right.
But I think about early America. I think about 1800s. I mean, what
Let them off.
Thriving, like I was just telling the kids was reading about Meriwether Lewis after he saw all of that with Clark and Lewis and Clark and that group of people. And they saw how open the West was. He wanted to keep all of that for fur trapping. No settlers, no hunters. Louisiana. I mean, the Louisiana Territory,
Yeah.
and did not have a sense of the purpose of America. But some people did. And who they were the farmers and the hunters and people like Daniel Boone, who started in North Carolina and already was in central Missouri, all the way across the Mississippi. Those guys were out there. And I was showing them, and then when the Germans and the Scandinavians got over here and found out they could go west and have all the land they could plow and get out, they built houses out of sod. They just went in and built and made. Sure, there was conflict with the Indians. Okay, and I'm sure there was conflict between the old sod buster and the ranchers, but there was a purpose of growth and taking over the country and building and growing. And
I think Lewis had a purpose. It's just a different purpose. The purpose was trapping.
not making money. He just want to make money.
Well, that is interesting. Is that like that comes to mind is that for men, war and making money tends to be two very important throughout history purposes, like common shared goals.
Yeah. Well, people don't only just want to be comfortable. They want to live next door to the neighbor that's like them. It's hard living next to neighbors that don't worship the same God or act differently or who can corrupt your family and things like that. I think some of that is in war and so on. It's not just for domination, like the First World War. First World War, I think, was just for pure material. No, what was the First World War about? It was that that thing about becoming yourself. The Germans, the Serbs, of being who you were supposed to be. It wasn't for money. It wasn't even for to subdue bad people, like say the Brits want to subdue the Hindus in India, or something like that. It was a bad religion, It was just we can rule everything.
And I mean that wasn't foreign to the Jews before Christ, right? I mean, they were told to conquering,
not conquer everything. That's just true. The land, the promised land.
And that's one big thing that Christ did change completely, is they thought he was coming to overthrow the government, and he was not at all.
Not the worldly government.
And I think that that was a new paradigm for these young men that he was calling.
Not in the short term.
The kingdom above.
I think in the long term, he was coming to overthrow the worldly government. Daniel, with the stone made without hands, smashes the tower.
Right, but they wanted him to. They
thought
he was deliver
Israel from, and that's what's the prophecy that Zechariah had to John the Baptist. He was talking about that what they were waiting for was someone to deliver the people, to deliver our nation, to free our nation.
But how confusing, not confusing, but strange it must have been for these young men that are following him. Their purpose is to make money, get fish for many of them, collect taxes for Matthew, and do things. Their mission, their purpose was all surrounding, and they thought he was bringing war, and so they were joining him to fight. Maybe partially
or whatever. Yeah,
and instead, it's to heal people.
And to be basically surrender to whatever God wants. But the kingdom above. But he said the kingdom was coming. Like Paul was saying, it will come, and there will be judgment on the earth. There will be the deliverance. However, you don't want to be a part of it. You don't want to be under it. Yeah, well, the purpose. Where were we talking about having a mission, having an explicit mission?
Yeah.
Goal orientation. I thought that was that really touched me that you said it was because that's the way I feel. I've always felt too. I don't want to get too goal oriented here. It's too athletic for me. It's too jock oriented. It's like And because you tend to kind of push people aside, you can be selfish that way. Also, but I think with me, it was probably secretly challenging me to too much work or hard self-discipline. If I put a
Yeah.
goal, then I got to put this thing aside. I don't want to put that thing aside. I want to play my guitar right now. I want to be able to live, like you said, poetically. From this to this, and let things kind of organically develop, right?
Yeah.
Instead of build them like blocks, right?
Well, and it is hard for me to distinguish between my own desire to my own laziness, or my own desire to keep things. And it is just a desire to keep things magical, to keep things poetic, versus an actual hope, listening to the spirit. Like a righteous calling.
Right.
Okay.
But I struggled with this a lot when I used to counsel young men. Setting expectations was difficult. With the parents saying, like, we're going to do this, this, and this. I wanted it to be organic.
Yeah.
And part of it, that I struggled with is because I didn't want to, like you're saying, set responsibilities for myself.
Well, yeah. There's always this idea, well, what's the point, say, with a construction project? Well, we're working as hard as we can. Why do we have to set a deadline? Like, it's going to get done when we get done. We're working as hard as, bull. If the building has to get done by a certain date, guess what? It gets done. And the idea that we're all just working as hard as we can or making the best decisions we can is hogwash.
Yeah, that's true.
When you have the constricting influence of a timeline, then you, one, can work, as it turns out, you can always work a little harder and a little faster. And two, you make the hard decision that we can't do that right now. We've got to do this or whatever. But often I say, well, when are we going to have, well, we're just working along as fast as we can. No, you're not. Neither am I. If you don't have some kind of constricting influence.
So it's healthy. There, we can agree that it's healthy, at least sometimes, to be explicit about your goal, your objective, and to be disciplined about working toward it. Right? What is your objective? What is your purpose?
I think it's particularly healthy for men.
Well, yeah, I was thinking in a general way, that's what we would call in theology, in our religion, to know the will of God. What is God's will? If we know the will of God, we know that that in some sense it will be accomplished, and we want to be a part of it. And we, now the will of God is not always necessarily timed. We don't think of it in those terms. But we do think of purpose in terms of the will of God. What is His will? And work toward it. Have a mission. What is our mission? I was just reading. I just happened to pick up this book, this old philosophy text that I bought right around 1900. So I was reading, on Plato and Aristotle. And the one thing I remember about Aristotle is I learned it back in Wheaton, and it's worth remembering, is the four causes. The four causes. Everything can be understood in terms of four causes. The material cause, that's the stuff it's made of. The formal cause, the plan, the way it's put together. The efficient cause, the hands that put it together, whatever puts it together. And the final cause, and it is the purpose. And I can't, that anybody back then, anybody would say that there's a cause in everything. There is a purpose for everything. They saw that back then. And that everything has a cause. But you think about it, everybody thinks that way. Even the evolutionists that believe it all came together by chance will say, well, this bird is red because, or this butterfly looks like a big face because it scares away predators. Well, they mean the ones that finally had a face scared away enough predators, they survived.
Right.
But they think of it in terms of purpose.
Causes,
We all do.
Yeah.
Why does the bird do that? Why does it? Why it's an end. We just feel that things have an end, and it is an inkling of the hand of God. We believe that if there's an end, if the eggs are made for an end, well, they're made for an end. They're made. I mean, if they have an end, there's something that,
Yeah, there's that tying in. I mean, the final cause has this sort of paradoxical tying of the end to the beginning. Right? The cause, you think of the cause as the beginning. The final cause is that its end is wrapped up in its beginning.
That's right.
That there's a sort of symmetry between beginning and end, which is why, I believe that the world that was created out of nothing by God and God called good is a world that is returning to that state. Otherwise, it would have been created bad. If it had a good beginning, then that's the final cause to which it's, has this passing through this spasmodic in between time. World that was created good.
How does that relate?
Cause.
How does that relate to our own personal goals, our own personal missions?
Well, I think that ties in that you were saying, and that has a sort of third party. We have to believe that there is this final thing that's drawing us forward, and it is the thing that birth does, right? That we have, we are launched with some kind of mission.
Yeah. Why am I here?
There's a target in which
and that's why family, I think, is so important.
Why?
Because first of all, it ties into our origin, and it is our first community. It is, and maybe could be. I mean, some could argue. It is our only community.
As you grow up, it's impossible not to think of yourself as, well, no, that's not true. Some people think, and the ones that we call it going off. Somebody goes off. Some kid
goes off.
Well, they leave the general family mission, that general family purpose, and they go off on their own, doing what they want to do,
like Jesus did,
and like I have. And there are reasons to go off. Well, Jesus, general family purpose.
Your family's over here. So who's my family?
Well, but he didn't leave the religion or the whole. Leave the family, yes. But he said, he had his own family. He had established his own family. It's true. A man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. What was happening was he was cleaving to the church. So that Paul explained it later. He had his own family. He said, "These are my brothers. This is my mother and my brothers." I suppose that's true. Every man, when he does his own.
But
family.
I think we've taken it to an extreme. As in the West, as we just abandon family. The many abandon the family, and it doesn't
think about it.
Yeah, a lot of and I wouldn't say a lot of my friends, but I know people that their family has no bearing on
what they do.
And in fact, many of these people don't really have any community. They just sort of.
Well, I think that's the problem.
They got friends. Even at the bar, they get buddies they see or whatever.
I guess in some ways everybody has
somebody they know how to see often.
Some community, I guess. Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that sense of togetherness. I mean, it's hard to have any kind of purpose if you don't have a purpose with others.
Yeah.
You're going to build it with others, unless you want to go. As I remember reading some guys, I want to go flying into the sun with my hair on fire. Well, who wants to do that? We don't want to go to hell. We want to go to heaven, and we're going to go that with some kind of community.
Yeah. Oh, I think it was what's his name? Wendell Berry said important part of the community is the limiting factor. It limits us, and limits our goals. It limits our through accountability.
Yes, that's true.
And I think that's important.
I will tell you, the older you get, the older I get, the older I get, the more I think about what am I doing. what is the program? What is the program?
What is the end?
Because there's so much you can do.
Yeah.
As you get to my age, you've honed your hobbies and your talents to where you can pretty much fill the day with what do you call it when you're not a professional something, you're just
Dilettante.
amateur. You're a dilettante at something. You can just do stuff,
Yeah.
Coin collecting, play the guitar, sing, draw a picture, go out and walk. I can do a lot of things, and so you have to think, what is the program? Church, has been able to draw that together. My wife, boom. Now y'all are off. When you come back in, of course, that draws back into two. So the family does help to limit that.
I think a nation can be that thing if it's small enough and it actually is a nation. I mean, you think about like Sparta.
That's right.
They had a part of your nation. That's what you were. I mean, not only could the nation didn't sort of accidentally fill that. That kind of was what it meant to be a nation. We're in this together. What is your mission? Well, your mission is keeping this thing going. This way of life, this language, this system is to be a nation.
Yeah.
That's
and that's war. That's what leads to war.
Yes.
Well, it could be just war with crime, like Superman. Truth, justice, and the American way. That back in the early 50s, we thought we knew what the American way was, and what do we have to do? Fight crime. Fight crime. And maybe at the time we thought of maybe.
Well, I think that's okay for superheroes, but if you're going to be a nation, if you're going to protect your nation, there's nothing but war.
Well, there's not nothing but war
to protect your nation.
Well, there's
only if you're attacked. To protect your if you're attacked, what else could you do?
Well,
capitulation.
Well,
fighting disease.
Yeah, I guess in order to form boundaries, you have. I mean, there's
defend your boundaries.
It's not necessarily war, violence.
I mean, it depends on whether your neighbors are particularly aggressive. Yeah. Bhutan has not been at war for years because turns out they have a natural boundary. This is why, for instance, island nations have, thrived.
Which we were for a while.
And which England, and because they don't have to spend so many resources identifying their borders and defending the borders. They're kind of already established. And some of them, they just use that to sort of insulate them, like Bhutan, Others, they build up something good and then they go trying to push it on everybody else. No offense.
But it has been the dream of lots of American leaders and world leaders that we could all live in peace. Let's just stay where we are and do our thing and let the other people do their thing. And it makes so much sense. And you ask yourself, well, then what is the flipping problem between Russia and Ukraine? Can't they just get along?
Yeah, that was an interesting. I know we're getting into politics, but did you see that interview with Trump where that girl was trying to get him to say that you pick a side, and he said, "I just want people to stop dying. Is that okay? I want people to stop dying, and I'd get it done in 5 seconds or whatever." But anyway,
phenomenal interview. I'm not sure what his point was.
But there's plenty of people that believe that there could be a time when there wouldn't be. There's a utopian way to live. They established the League of Nations, which we didn't join. Henry Cabot Lodge kept us out of it, and some guys with him. And then the United Nations, which is feckless, powerless. They can't even look at it. Russia and the Ukraine, they can't do anything about it. The United States tries to get involved, and I don't know that we help getting involved in this and that. I'm reading the proverb. It says the man that gets involved with a quarrel that's not his, is like picking up a dog by the ears. That's we get involved in a lot of these quarrels that are not ours. And I'm just like anybody else. I feel for the Ukrainians and for the Serbians and for the Kosovos and all these people too. But the question is, what is our role? And I have to say, I really don't know. I'm not rooting for war or not war. I'm just saying, I'm not a leader. But our purpose in America should be to live peaceably, to make to a person. I think our explicit purpose in America is to make it a place where people can be free to contribute to the general welfare. You know, you contribute and you take from the general welfare peacefully, right? Keep everything peaceful and allow people to find their own way.
Mm-hmm.
That used to be, I don't know.
Well, I think if nothing else, this talk has helped me think more about my neighbors in terms of my purpose. I've written my purpose, but or my personal mission statement, and I have nothing about my neighbors. It is something to think about.
For sure.
Well, how we relate.
You've written a mission statement.
Yeah, we had to do it for. We were in a group for 5.
Good.
7.
Do you check on each other to see for progress?
Yes.
Yeah.
7 habits of relatively successful people.
Effective.
Efficient.
Effective. Let me check.
Highly
Yes.
effective. Highly effective.
Effective. Yes. Yeah.
Effective.
Okay, be effective. Find out what your mission is
Do it.
and be
Go quick.
intentional,
Whatever thou doest.
but be poetic at the same time.
Keep it secret. Keep it safe. All right. Thank you, everybody.